Why did no one move when she was shoved toward the rail? The deck lurched, steel groaning beneath boots that had seen too many oceans. Wind tore across the fantail, carrying salt and mockery in equal measure. She stood alone, back against the cold bulkhead, eyes fixed on the horizon as if it might answer a question no one else could hear. To them she was invisible. Worse, she was inconvenient. The Marines clustered nearby were loud without speaking, their presence thick, territorial. They wore confidence like armor, arrogance like rank. They glanced at her the way predators glance at something smaller, not as a threat, but as an error. A woman. Quiet, navy, technical. She didn't flinch when they laughed. They mistook her silence for weakness, her stillness for fear. They didn't see the math running behind her eyes, the assessments, weight distribution, distance to the rail, wind speed, roll angle. They didn't see her breathing. One step closer. A comment thrown like bait, another step, the deck shifted, someone stumbled or pretended to. And then hands struck her back. For a fraction of a second she was weightless, suspended between steel and sea, between assumption and truth. No one shouted, "Man overboard." No one reached for her. She fell into the Pacific as if erased. Cold swallowed her whole, not the kind that stings, but the kind that steals breath and replaces thought with panic. For most people, that first gasp would have been fatal. She didn't gasp. Her body screamed. Her mind answered with discipline. Slow exhale, control the shock, equalize, orient. The ocean dragged her under, darkness closing in like a verdict. Somewhere above, massive propellers thundered, churning water into death. She kicked away, precise and economical, counting strokes like prayers she'd memorized long ago. When she surfaced, it was quietly. No thrashing, no screaming. Just breath. The ship was already moving on. Gray against gray, shrinking unaware. She floated alone, rain beginning to fall, waves lifting her and dropping her like punctuation marks in a sentence no one planned to finish. She checked herself the way she'd been trained to check weapons. Nothing broken, pain manageable, time limited. Then her hand found the beacon. A soft click, a blink of green. Not a plea, a record. She curled into herself, conserving heat, watching the sky darken. Hypothermia crept in slowly, politely, offering rest. She refused it. She filled her mind with numbers, protocols, encrypted sequences, anything to keep the operator awake. Hours passed. On the ship, laughter swallowed guilt. Stories were prepared, accidents rehearsed. The ocean, they assumed, would do the rest. They were wrong. Because somewhere above the clouds, a signal whispered to something that knew how to listen. And the sea, for once, did not claim what it was given. What kind of person survives the ocean without calling for help? By the time the helicopter's light found her, she had already accepted that rescue was optional. Survival was not. The beam cut through rain and night, not searching homing. That mattered. Random hope feels different than intention. When the swimmer hit the water beside her, she barely had the strength to nod. Her body was stiff, her thoughts thick, but the mission inside her was still running. Phase 1 complete. As they lifted her from the sea, wrapped her in noise and motion and warmth, her last clear thought wasn't gratitude. It was documentation. Back aboard the ship, she became a rumor before she became a patient. A miracle. A mistake. A liability. She lay in medical, core temperature dangerously low, listening to whispers filter through bulkheads. Some said she was lucky. Others said careless. A few said worse, that she'd done it on purpose. She didn't correct them. She typed. Her report was short, exact, unemotional. It named times, forces, bodies in motion. It didn't ask for justice. It recorded reality. While others spoke, she worked. Days later, when the ship's systems trembled under a threat no one could see, she felt it before alarms sounded. Patterns don't announce themselves. They reveal. She walked into the Combat Information Center without asking permission. Men twice her rank bristled. Someone told her to leave. Someone else hesitated. She didn't argue. She listened. Chaos on the screen wasn't chaos to her. It was residue, delay, a ghost in the machine. Her fingers moved like memory. Code unfolded, filters narrowed, noise fell away. And suddenly, the enemy was naked. Coordinates, depth, course. A ghost submarine exposed not by force, but by patience. No cheers followed, just silence. The kind that comes when people realize they were wrong. Very wrong. That night, the strike group slept safely because of a woman they hadn't bothered to see. And somewhere in the ship, 3 Marines stopped laughing. Why did her silence terrify them more than any accusation ever could? She walked the passageways like someone already forgiven by herself. Eyes followed her now, some curious, some ashamed, some angry that the story they'd believed had collapsed under its own weight. She didn't confront anyone. She waited. Investigations don't need volume, they need time. Logs were pulled, data compared, forces measured. A camera once ignored remembered something important. The truth assembled itself quietly. When the Marines stood before the captain, their confidence cracked fast. Facts don't shout, they stack. A shove isn't a slip when physics disagrees. A smile isn't invisible when salt can be cleaned from a lens. And a victim isn't weak when she refuses to perform pain. When her full file was opened, the room changed. Not because of the title, not because of the unit, but because of the realization. They hadn't thrown a tech into the sea. They tried to erase someone trained to endure it. Ranks fell, careers ended, consequences arrived without drama. She wasn't present. She didn't need to be. What does respect look like when it's finally earned? The hangar bay was silent when they saluted her. Hundreds of Marines, 1 woman. No speech could improve the moment. No apology could undo the past. But acknowledgement mattered. She returned the salute with precision, not pride, not triumph. Closure. Later, back at her console, the glow of signals reflected in her eyes, the world returned to what made sense. Patterns, problems, purpose. A commander returned her unit patch. She accepted it without ceremony. When asked how she endured it all, the shove, the cold, the lies, she didn't offer inspiration. She offered truth. Systems fail, she said, training corrects. And turned back to her work. Because dignity doesn't announce itself. It doesn't shout. Sometimes it doesn't even survive on land. Sometimes dignity falls into the ocean, holds its breath, waits, and returns unchanged. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why didn't she scream when the water closed over her head? The cold hit like a verdict, not sharp, absolute. It wrapped around her chest and squeezed, demanding panic, demanding surrender. Every nerve fired at once, begging her lungs to gulp air that wasn't there. That was how the ocean usually won. Not with depth, not with force, but with that first traitorous breath. She denied it. Her body convulsed, instinct warring against discipline, but discipline had been carved into her long before this night. She let the darkness take her down instead of fighting it, counting heartbeats the way others count prayers. 1, 2, 3. The roar of the ship's screws vibrated through her bones, a sound that meant death if she drifted too close. Angle away, kick clean, don't rush. The water pressed in, heavy and endless, and for a fleeting moment a thought surfaced, not fear but irritation. Not like this, not after everything. She broke the surface quietly, rain slicing into her face as if the sky itself had teeth. Waves rose and fell like walls, lifting her just high enough to show her how alone she was before dropping her again into gray nothingness. The ship was already moving on. She watched it without anger. Anger wasted heat, wasted thought. She had learned that early emotions were tools, not masters. Right now, she needed clarity more than outrage. Her fingers found the beacon by muscle memory alone. Press, confirm, one soft blink. That wasn't hope, that was evidence. She drew her knees in, forcing her body into the smallest shape possible, riding the swell instead of fighting it. The ocean didn't reward resistance, it punished it. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Time became slippery out there, measured not in seconds but in shivers. Each wave slapped her face like a reminder, stay awake, stay here. Her mind drifted to training, not the glamorous kind people imagine, but the ugly days. The days instructors stripped away comfort and dignity until only habits remained. Flood pools, ice water. The rule that mattered most wasn't strength. It was refusal. Don't negotiate with the cold. Don't ask it how long it plans to stay. Assume it will outlast you and act accordingly. Her teeth chattered violently now. She let them. Shivering meant her body was still fighting. She cataloged the sensation like a technician reading instruments. When it stops, that's the danger. That's when the lie of warmth arrives. She refused the lie. Rain blurred the horizon. Night settled in, thick and heavy. She was acutely aware of how small she was, a single human shape in a vast equation of wind, current, and indifference. It would have been easy to feel erased. Instead, she felt focused. She thought of the men on deck, not with rage but with clarity, their faces replayed without sound. The shove, the smile, the assumption that the ocean would finish what they started. They had misjudged her, but not because she was exceptional. Because they believed silence meant weakness. The cold gnawed deeper. Her hands lost dexterity. Her legs felt distant, as if they belonged to someone else. She adjusted her posture with deliberate slowness, conserving energy, forcing herself to stay intentional. She spoke quietly to herself, barely audible over the wind. Not affirmations, procedures. Breathing pattern, orientation, check limbs, stay aware. At some point, exhaustion crept in, wearing kindness. The water didn't feel as sharp anymore. The shaking eased. The rain felt softer. The idea of closing her eyes seemed reasonable. That was the most dangerous moment of all. She forced her mind back into motion by remembering faces, not family, not comfort, but instructors. Hard eyes, voices that had once yelled her back from the edge of quitting. The ocean doesn't care who you are. Good, neither do I. She stayed awake out of stubbornness as much as discipline. Far away, unseen, the beacon spoke in numbers and bursts. It didn't beg. It simply existed, announcing that something was wrong in a language only a few understood. Back on the ship, the absence of her presence went unnoticed at first. Ships are loud places. People vanish into compartments and routines. Silence blends in. When her workstation stayed empty, when messages went unanswered, concern began to bloom, not panic, just discomfort. Questions without urgency. Eventually, alarms sounded, procedures activated, voices rose. Too late. Searchlights carved useless shapes into the sea miles from where she floated. Radios crackled with controlled frustration. Probability charts filled screens with grim math. Lost at sea. The phrase settled like a period. Somewhere below deck, men told their story again. Each time it got smoother, cleaner, more convincing. An accident, tragic, unavoidable. They believed it. Out in the water, she was dimly aware that her thoughts were slowing, not fading, stretching. Words came harder, numbers blurred at the edges. She adjusted again, forced motion, a hand into the water, pressure, pain. Good, pain means presence. When the light finally appeared, it didn't register as hope at first, just an anomaly, a brightness where none belonged. It moved differently than stars, more deliberate. She watched it with distant curiosity until it stopped searching and pointed. Then she allowed herself one quiet breath of relief, not joy, not triumph. Just acknowledgement. The swimmer's voice cut through the storm, sharp and alive. Hands gripped her harness. She let herself be guided, trusting training in others now. As she rose from the water, the ocean released her without protest. On the deck of the helicopter, wrapped in noise and motion, she stared at nothing and thought of the men who had turned their backs. They would never understand this part. They would never know what it meant to be utterly alone and choose to remain. And that was fine, because survival wasn't the point. Correction was. And this was only the beginning. Why did the ship feel colder after she returned than the ocean ever had? They brought her back wrapped in layers, but warmth didn't come with them. The stretcher wheels rattled through passageways lined with faces that didn't know where to look. Some stared too long, others turned away too fast. A few nodded as if survival itself required explanation. She let them move her, let them speak over her, let the medical bay lights burn into her eyes. Her body was there, her mind was already working. Numbers came first: core temperature, time submerged, drift estimation. She listened to the flight surgeon's voice like background static, catching only what mattered. 91 degrees, dangerous, recoverable. "Do you remember what happened?" someone asked gently, as if softness might coax emotion out of her. "I remember," she said. That was all. Word spread faster than truth ever does on a ship. By the time she could sit up, there were already two versions of her story moving through the steel corridors. In one, she was unlucky. In the other, incompetent. In a darker, quieter version, she was attention-hungry, a liability who had cost fuel, time, sleep. She heard fragments through bulkheads and vents. She didn't respond. Responding would have meant explaining, and explaining, she knew, was premature. After 48 hours, they cleared her for light duty. Light duty felt like an insult dressed as concern. She accepted it anyway. Arguing would have drawn attention. Attention would have fed the wrong narrative. She walked the ship slowly, feeling its rhythms again. The hum of generators, the subtle vibration of propulsion. Ships had moods. Today, this one was unsettled. People watched her pass like they were checking to see if ghosts cast shadows. In the mess, conversations dipped when she entered. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Someone laughed too loudly to compensate. Someone else muttered miracle like it was a diagnosis. She took her tray, sat alone, ate mechanically. Across the room, a cluster of Marines occupied their usual space. Their laughter was controlled now, careful. Confidence had been replaced with something thinner, defiance mixed with calculation. She felt their eyes flick toward her and away again. They were building something. She recognized the shape of it. She'd seen it before in other forms. A firewall. A story reinforced through repetition until it hardened into truth by exhaustion. Accident, storm, slippery deck. Say it enough times and people stop asking. She finished her meal and left without looking at them. Her workspace welcomed her without judgment. No windows, no opinions, just screens and quiet. She logged in, hands steady, mind aligning with familiar patterns. Signals flowed across her displays, clean, complex, honest in their own way. She breathed easier there. Her official statement took less than 10 minutes to write. She didn't embellish, didn't speculate, didn't plead. She named actions, times, forces. She submitted it and closed the file. That was step 1. Step 2 required patience. The ship sailed on, carrying tension like an extra cargo. Rumors thickened. Some painted her as reckless, others as unstable. Someone suggested she shouldn't have been on the fantail at all, as if permission could rewrite physics. She heard that one and felt something twist inside her, not anger, but fatigue. The old, familiar weight of being judged before being understood. She pushed it down. 3 days later, the ship's mood changed abruptly. It happened just after midnight, when the ocean looked deceptively calm and exhaustion dulled everyone's edges. An alarm pulsed low through the hull, not loud enough to panic, just enough to demand attention. She felt it before she heard it. Her screen shifted, patterns warped. Something was there. She followed the change instinctively, rising from her chair and moving toward the Combat Information Center without checking orders. When you spend long enough listening to invisible things, you learn when one is lying. The CIC was tense when she entered. Operators leaned toward their consoles. Voices stayed clipped, controlled. A submerged contact, quiet too quiet. She watched the data spill across a secondary display and felt a familiar frustration bloom, not because it was hard, but because everyone else was looking at it the wrong way. They were hunting a signal that didn't want to be found. She wasn't interested in the signal. She was interested in its shadow. Someone told her the area was restricted. Someone else started to argue. The captain raised a hand without turning around. "Let her work," he said. She sat. What followed didn't feel heroic. It felt inevitable, like watching a knot loosen once you pull the correct thread. She filtered, narrowed, ignored 99% of the noise, looked not for presence but for absence, the tiny delays hardware couldn't hide, the microsecond stutters where perfection failed. There. She isolated it, tested it, confirmed. A ghost suddenly outlined. Her voice was calm when she spoke. It always was when things mattered. "They're here," she said, "and they think we can't see them." Coordinates followed, depth, course, predictive behavior. The room went still in that rare way, the way it does when certainty replaces fear. Orders flew, systems aligned. Somewhere far below, something realized it had been noticed and fled. No celebration followed, just exhalation. The captain looked at her differently now, not impressed, recalibrated. By morning, the story had changed. She hadn't just survived. She saved the ship. That kind of truth moves faster than lies. For the Marines, it was catastrophic. Whispers stopped mid-sentence when she passed. Jokes dried up. Confidence drained away, replaced by avoidance. They no longer met her eyes, no longer laughed when she was near. She didn't take satisfaction in it. She felt something else instead, a quiet sadness. Not for them, but for the cost of ignorance. For how close they had come to ending something they never bothered to understand. The investigation accelerated after that. Logs were reviewed, data scrutinized, inconsistencies surfaced under pressure, physics didn't agree with testimony, time stamps refused to cooperate with fiction. A camera feed, long dismissed, yielded just enough clarity to matter. When the findings were complete, she was not called in. She didn't need to be. Correction doesn't require an audience. When the announcement came ordering all hands to the hangar bay, she already knew why. She stood with her department, hands folded, face unreadable. Apologies were issued, salutes rendered. She accepted them the way she accepted everything else, without hunger. Later, back at her console, someone returned her unit patch. She stared at it for a moment before setting it beside her keyboard. She didn't sew it back on yet. There was still work to do. And somewhere deep inside, beneath discipline and restraint, a quiet truth settled into place. They had tried to erase her. Instead, they had revealed her. Not through survival, but through patience, through precision, through refusing to become what they expected her to be. And that, she knew, would last longer than any storm. Why did the apology feel heavier than the silence that came before it? The hangar bay smelled of oil, metal, and something unspoken. Thousands stood shoulder to shoulder, yet the space felt hollow, like a breath held too long. She took her place without ceremony, hands resting where they always did, eyes forward. She didn't scan the crowd. She didn't search for faces. She already knew who was here for her and who was. When the captain stepped forward, his voice carried without effort. Authority didn't need volume. He spoke of facts, of failure, of correction. Each word landed with weight because none of them reached for drama. This wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about recognition, the kind that arrives late and stays longer. She listened without expression. She had learned years ago that being praised could be as disorienting as being dismissed. Both tried to tell you who you were. Neither mattered as much as what you did next. Then the Marine commander stepped forward. That was when the room changed. He didn't soften his tone. He didn't hedge. He spoke to his people first, and in that order, because responsibility flows down before it flows out. His apology wasn't loud. It was complete. The kind that leaves no space for excuses. When 200 Marines snapped to attention and saluted her, the sound echoed off steel like a single heartbeat. She returned it precisely, no flourish, no delay. For a moment, everything was balanced. Later, the ship settled into its night rhythm again. Engines hummed. Bulkheads ticked as metal cooled. The ocean outside looked almost gentle, like it hadn't tried to kill her days earlier. She returned to her workspace because that was where she belonged. Not because she was avoiding people, but because work was honest. Signals didn't care about gender or rank or rumor. They either aligned or they didn't. She was halfway through a diagnostic sweep when the door slid open quietly. The commander stood there holding a patch. She recognized it immediately. Black Phoenix, wings wide, a symbol meant to be unseen until it mattered. It had been removed when she boarded for security reasons. Given back now, it carried a different weight. "Captain thought you want this returned," he said. She looked at it for a long moment before answering. Not because she was sentimental, but because symbols deserve attention when they're earned again. "Thank you," she said. He lingered, searching for words that would not intrude. Finally, he spoke. "What you did out there, and then here, most people would have reacted differently." She turned to face him fully. Her eyes were calm, clear, without edge. "The system worked," she said, "eventually. That was all." After he left, she pinned the patch inside her locker, not on her uniform, not yet. Visibility wasn't the point. She turned back to her screens as new patterns emerged, faint, irregular, asking to be understood. The world didn't pause for resolution. It never had. As the hours passed, fatigue finally settled in. Not the bone-deep exhaustion of the ocean, but something quieter. The kind that comes after restraint, after holding everything in place until the structure stops shaking. She leaned back and closed her eyes for 10 seconds. No more. Memory surfaced uninvited. The first time she'd been told she didn't belong. The first time she'd learned silence was safer than arguing. The years of being underestimated, not loudly, but persistently. The way doubt accumulates not through insults, but through omission. She thought of the moment she'd gone over the rail. The split second where the world tilted and revealed its truth. Not that people could be cruel, she already knew that, but that they could be careless with lives they didn't bother to understand. She felt no urge to forgive. Forgiveness was personal, this was professional. What mattered was that the record now reflected reality. What mattered was that next time, someone like her might not be standing alone on a steel deck, quietly calculating whether the ocean would be kinder than the people beside her. The ship rolled gently beneath her feet. She adjusted automatically. Resilience, she knew, wasn't about enduring pain. It was about remaining intact while systems corrected around you, about refusing to let bitterness rewrite your purpose. The ocean had tried to claim her. So had arrogance. Neither succeeded. And as she worked through the night, solving problems no one else could see yet, one quiet truth anchored her more securely than any bulkhead ever could. Strength doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrives soaked, shivering and patient. Sometimes it waits, and sometimes, when the world finally looks up, strength is already back at work. Why did she feel more exposed standing on steel than she ever had floating alone in the dark? The ship moved through the night with the confidence of something that believed itself untouchable. Lights glowed behind portholes. Conversations resumed. Laughter returned, cautious at first, then louder, as if volume alone could erase memory. Life, as it always did, tried to normalize the extraordinary. She felt the shift and didn't share it. Survival had sharpened her, not softened her. And recognition, oddly enough, left her feeling stripped. When you're ignored, you're invisible. When you're acknowledged, you're suddenly defined by other people's words. She didn't want that. She wanted to work. But even work felt different now. People knocked before entering her space. Rank suddenly mattered. Opinions were asked for instead of dismissed. She noticed the change and filed it away with the same detachment she used for everything else. Respect earned through spectacle never sat right with her. She trusted respect built slowly, quietly, without witnesses. A few days later, she found herself back on the fantail. Not by accident. The sea was calmer now, stretched out in layered gray, deceptively peaceful. The same rail, the same deck, different air. She stood where she'd been pushed, hands resting lightly on cold steel, eyes on the wake unraveling behind the ship. No one was with her. No one needed to be. She didn't replay the moment the way people expect survivors to. There was no tremor, no cinematic flash, just a quiet acknowledgement of physics, probability, and choice. She had survived because she had been prepared. That truth grounded her. Behind her, Boots approached, then stopped at a respectful distance. A young sailor cleared his throat. "Chief," he said, I wanted to say thank you." She didn't turn right away. "For what?" she asked. "For staying," he said, "for coming back, for not becoming what they thought you were." She considered that. "I didn't come back for them," she said finally. "I came back because the work wasn't finished." He nodded, as if that answered more than one question, then left her alone again. That night she dreamed of water but not drowning. In the dream she was floating effortlessly, face up, stars above, body weightless. No urgency, no struggle. When she woke she felt steady. Days passed. The ship resumed its pattern of purpose. Intelligent cycles, drills, watches, everything layered with a new, quiet awareness that capability doesn't always announce itself. The Marines were gone at the next port. No fanfare, no public spectacle, just absence. Their names stopped circulating. Their story concluded the way most real ones do, quietly, conclusively. She watched the coastline slip past and felt no satisfaction. Closure doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it feels like space. She used that space well. Her analysis fed into larger operations. Patterns she'd flagged weeks earlier now aligned with new intelligence. A broader picture emerged, not dramatic but consequential. Decisions were adjusted, assets repositioned. She didn't brief it herself. She sent it up the chain. That was enough. One evening, as the ship cut through calm water under a pale moon, she finally sewed the patch back onto her uniform. Not on the outside, on the inside of her blouse, where it rested over her ribs. Not hidden, protected. Because some things aren't meant to be displayed. Some things exist to remind. She thought again of the ocean, of how it had tested her without malice, how it had demanded competence and offered no forgiveness. In that way, it had been honest. People she knew were messier. They projected, they assumed, they filled silence with their own noise. Her job wasn't to correct all of that. Her job was to remain precise. She wrote a final addendum to her report that night, not required, not requested. It contained no names. It read simply, training functions when systems fail. Preparation is quiet. Correction is inevitable. She closed the file. As the ship pressed forward into darkness, she felt something she hadn't felt since before the rail, before the cold, before the fall. Not relief. Alignment. She had not been broken by what happened. She had not been remade either. She had remained. And sometimes she realized that was the hardest thing of all. Why did the ocean feel quieter now, even though nothing about it had changed? The last night at sea arrived without ceremony. No announcement, no marker on a calendar, just a subtle shift in the air, the kind only people who live on moving steel learn to feel. The ship pressed forward through dark water, engines steady, purpose restored. Around her, routines continued, watches changed, reports filed, lives resumed. And yet something inside her loosened. She stood alone on the weathered deck, wrapped in the muted glow of red lights meant to preserve night vision. The horizon was a thin, uncertain line where sea and sky negotiated ownership. The same ocean that had taken her without warning now rolled gently, almost respectfully, as if it remembered. She knew better than to romanticize it. The ocean doesn't remember, it doesn't regret, it doesn't apologize. It simply is. People, on the other hand, carried echoes. She felt them in small moments, a delayed glance, a careful tone, a hesitation before someone spoke her name. Even now, after everything, some didn't know how to place her. Survivor, asset, threat to their assumptions. She let them struggle. Her reflection stared back at her faintly in the glass, not heroic, not hardened, just present. A woman who had fallen into cold truth and come back carrying it quietly. She thought of who she had been before the deck rolled. Not weaker, not naive. Just less visible to herself. The fall had stripped away something subtle, the last need to be understood by those unwilling to listen. In its place was a sharper certainty, not confidence, alignment. She had chosen not to shout when shoved, not to beg when drowning, not to accuse when returned. Each choice had cost her something. Each had also preserved something far more valuable. Her center. A memory surfaced then, not of the ocean, but of an early training evolution, long before rank or reputation. A freezing dawn. A cadre member watching silently as candidates struggled through exhaustion. Someone had asked, barely audible, what happens if we can't keep going? The answer had been simple. Then you don't belong here. At the time, it had sounded cruel. Now she understood. It wasn't about toughness. It was about refusal, about choosing to remain operational when comfort, pride, and fairness were stripped away. That night, a junior officer approached her hesitantly. He looked nervous in a way that had nothing to do with rank. "Chief," he said, "may I ask you something?" She nodded. "Why didn't you say anything when you came back? You could have demanded more, made noise." She considered the question longer than necessary, not because she didn't know the answer, but because answers shape people. "Noise creates resistance," she said. "Evidence creates movement." He frowned slightly, absorbing that. "And the anger," he asked, "didn't you feel it?" She did not lie. "Yes," she said, "I just didn't let it drive." He nodded, thanked her, and walked away changed in a way he wouldn't understand for years. When dawn came, it arrived soft and pale, washing the ship in gray-blue light. The ocean looked endless again, not hostile, not gentle, just vast. She watched it and felt no need to conquer it. Some battles aren't meant to be won. They're meant to be survived intact. Later that morning, she packed her small space. There wasn't much. She traveled light, always had. The patch rested where she'd placed it, unseen but close. Before leaving, she paused and looked once more at the screens that had been her refuge. Signals still flowed. Patterns still waited to be solved. Someone else would take the watch. That was as it should be. As she stepped onto the deck for the last time before transfer, the wind caught her hair, tugging at it insistently. She smiled faintly, not from joy, but from recognition. The world would keep testing her, in different forms, different places, with quieter hands and subtler shoves. She was ready, not because she had survived the ocean, but because she had learned something deeper than endurance. That dignity doesn't require witnesses. That strength doesn't need permission. That silence, when chosen, can be sharper than any accusation. The ship moved on behind her. The sea remained. And she walked forward carrying no bitterness, no need for validation, only the steady weight of knowing who she was when no one was watching. Sometimes survival isn't the story. Sometimes the story is what refuses to change afterward. Sometimes dignity doesn't shout. It doesn't explain. It doesn't demand to be believed. Sometimes dignity falls into darkness, waits, and returns on its own terms. And sometimes, when the world finally looks up, dignity is already gone, quietly doing the work that matters.